Did you know that the Beorn we get in the second Hobbit movie is nothing like Tolkien's Beorn in the Hobbit book? While the movie portrays an angry Skinchanger who's constantly on edge and ready to chop you up with his axe, the book shows us a well-mannered and kind individual who is intrigued by Gandalf's story of their time in the mountain. And not only intrigued, but impressed and very pleased by their slaying of the Goblin King. So much so that he offers them any and all assistance he can for their journey. And in today's video, I'm going to uncover every change, revision, and omission the movie made to this crucial chapter in the book. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to episode 5 of Movies vs. Manuscripts, the Hobbit Edition. Per usual, I'll cover all the changes across the 4 major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But first, let's recap what happens during these scenes in the movie. That way, it's fresh on our mind for the analysis. So, picking up with the opening of the second film, we see Thorin and the Prancing Pony and Gandalf sitting down at his table. They discuss the fact that someone is hunting down Thorin, and Gandalf encourages him to reclaim Erebor. They end their conversation as Gandalf mentions they'll need a burglar, and the movie cuts to Bilbo, who is scouting out some land as the company hides from Azog and his orcs. Bilbo sees the orcs run off, and then he turns to find a large bear-looking thing. Bilbo runs back to the company and alerts them of this new terror, and Gandalf guides them to somewhere they might be safe. As they run through a field to get to the safe house, the bear charges after them, and they just barely make it inside before getting caught. Gandalf then tells them that the bear is their host, and he is a Skinchanger. They then sleep in the house, and it isn't until the next morning that Gandalf introduces them to their host, Beorn. Before that, though, we get a quick scene of Azog being summoned back to Dol Guldur, where the necromancer talks with him about some upcoming war. Azog then tasks Bolg with hunting down Thorin's company, and we'll see more of him in future episodes. Then we cut back to Beorn's house, and in an extended edition scene, Gandalf tells the dwarves to only come out 2 by 2, and only on his signal. Then as he talks with Beorn, the dwarves get confused and begin coming out too fast, causing Beorn to be frightened and upset. What calms him down is when he sees Thorin walk out last. The movie then cuts to them eating, and Beorn reluctantly agrees to help them because he says that he hates orcs more than dwarves. The company then prepares to head out resupplied and rested, and Beorn speaks with Gandalf about the necromancer of Dol Guldur. Eventually they leave and make it to the edge of Mirkwood, where Gandalf leaves them so that he can go investigate said necromancer. He tells them to stay on the path, for if they leave it, they may never find it again, and that is where scenes in chapter end for this week. So let's jump right into the changes by going over our first 3 categories of characters, timeline, and location. First, our character category is pretty simple, and most of you know what I'm about to say. But for those of you who are new here, Azog is actually dead during the events of The Hobbit. Later in the book, during the Battle of 5 Armies, it is Azog's offspring, Bolg, who leads the orcs. Azog has been dead for quite a while by the time Thorin goes on his quest for Erebor, but besides him, we don't really have any other character issues. Next, regarding timeline, we once again have to mention that the Dol Guldur plot is warped for the film. It's partially true, but the timeline is quite off, and I actually made a full video about the complete timeline of Sauron's Secret Fortress, so instead of explaining everything here, you can just check that video out after you finish this video. Trust me, if you're planning on sticking around for this series, it's worth a watch, because almost every episode we have has a Dol Guldur issue. Anyway, the primary timeline change here is the fact that in the opening scene of the movie, Gandalf acts as though he knows nothing of Thrain's situation, because technically in the movie timeline, he has yet to find Thrain. But in Tolkien's timeline, Gandalf had already ventured into Dol Guldur and found Thrain about 90 years before the events of The Hobbit. So there's that. Finally, for location, we have an interesting addition that Peter Jackson made for this trilogy, and that is the High Fells of Rudar. By the way, I'm probably butchering that name, but it doesn't matter because it's made up. There is another Rudar in Tolkien's lore, but it's completely separate and unrelated. The High Fells of Rudar never appear in Tolkien's lore because, as far as I'm aware, the Nazgul were never buried. So the idea that they were entombed and then somehow escaped their tomb is just completely false. If you'd be interested in a video all about the complete timeline and lore of the 9 Nazgul, let me know in the comments. Now, before we jump into all the plot changes for today, I wanted to give a shout out to Jason, Cody, Joshua, and the rest of my incredible Patreon supporters who help make these videos possible every month. Every week on Patreon, I post my video research, thumbnail and title polls, and every video ad-free for early viewing. So if you want to join the community, you can check out the link in the description. Now with that being said, let's dive into the plot changes. First up, let's address the Azog stuff right off the bat. Any scene including him, Bolg, or the Necromancer is made up and not in Tolkien's lore, mainly because, as we mentioned earlier, Azog is dead, but additionally, Thorin's company isn't being chased by an orc pack like the movie shows. We'll learn later that the goblins of the mountains were hunting them to avenge the Goblin King, but it's not like what the movie shows of Bilbo actively scouting and watching Azog and his group in the distance. They don't find out about the goblins hunting them until a day later. Now moving on to the real start of the movie, with Gandalf and Thorin meeting in the Prancing Pony, we have a pretty important change regarding Thrain and how he disappeared. Thorin recounts to Gandalf what happened to his father during their battle against Azog, but that is completely wrong. The Battle of Azan-ul-Bazar did indeed happen, and it resulted in Azog's death, but afterward, Thorin and his father took their people and settled in the Blue Mountains. It isn't until Thrain and a small company set out to investigate the Lonely Mountain that he was captured by Sauron's forces and taken to Dol Guldur, where Sauron took the last Dwarven ring from him. So no, he did not charge into battle and then get lost in the mix and disappear. But I get it, they saved time by not going into the longer explanation, and instead just lumped him into the story that we're already being fed. Our next change takes us deeper into the chapter in question today, as Gandalf and Thorin's company leave the Carrock where the eagles drop them off and head towards Beorn's house. The movie moves around a small detail, which is the fact that at the very beginning of this chapter, Gandalf informs them that he must be leaving them soon, but he has a couple more days before this happens. The dwarves beg him to stay and try to bribe him with gold and treasures, but he says that this was never his quest, and he simply wanted to see them get past the Misty Mountains, which now they have. In the movie, Gandalf doesn't tell them he's leaving until they reach Mirkwood, and really in the movie, Gandalf doesn't know himself that he'll be leaving until that very moment, as he realizes that he has urgent matters to tend to elsewhere. Next, the scene that we do get, which shows Bilbo spying and then the dwarves running to Beorn's house, is a very abbreviated version of what the book says. And really, this is the first time we're seeing this happen in the trilogy. The entire first movie pretty much takes small chapters and extends them to 40 or 50 minutes of screen time. This week, however, we have a chapter that's about an hour long on Audible, but only 30 minutes on the screen. So they essentially cut half of it. And I am sad they did, because there's so much fluff added to this trilogy that could have been cut to make room for keeping other parts of the movie that were true to the book. But anyway, here's what really happens in the book. To start, no, Bilbo doesn't spy on anything, like we said. He simply walks along with Gandalf and asks him questions about where they're going and who their potential host is. Gandalf shares a great deal about Beorn with Bilbo and the others, telling them that he's a skin changer and that his origins trace back to the mountains, which is why he hates goblins and orcs. The company continued walking for many hours, and eventually by afternoon, they had reached the outskirts of Beorn's property where he kept his bees. They could tell this area was well maintained, and the bees were as big as Bilbo's thumb. And the next change here is that no, they were not chased by a bear, and they did not enter any home without permission. I never understood that part of the movie, as I doubt Beorn would have very much liked it if they slept in his house without his permission. Anyway, our next change is one that I'm so sad we never got to see, and that would be Beorn's many animals. I would call them servants, but that may sound a little extreme. Helpers might be a better word. Essentially, Beorn could speak to all of his animals, and they all had jobs around his home. As Gandalf and the others approached his gate, Gandalf gives instructions to only come 2 by 2, which we'll talk about in a minute. But he and Bilbo approach first, and as they do, they encounter a couple of horses who study them and then gallop off. Gandalf tells Bilbo that the horses are going to inform Beorn of strangers on his property. This is the first taste of Beorn's helpers, and we'll see more of them later as they have dinner. But now we can move into Gandalf and Bilbo's encounter with Beorn himself. And like I said at the beginning of this video, it's quite different. First, Beorn's attitude is vastly different in the book. I don't know why the movie made him seem so on edge, like he could kill you at any moment, because in the book he is pretty well-mannered and laid back. For example, as Gandalf and Bilbo walk up, Beorn dismisses his horses and tells them that these strangers don't look dangerous at all, and then he laughs loudly as he sets down his axe and walks toward them. That's right, he laughs. I don't know about you, but movie Beorn doesn't seem like he's ever laughed in his entire life. And later, as the dwarves approach and keep bowing to him, he finds them super amusing, with their long beards bouncing up and down and waggling about. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. Let's take a look at what other changes there were besides his personality. The next change we have is that Beorn is genuinely interested in their story. As Gandalf and Bilbo approach, they introduce themselves and Beorn asks why they're there. Gandalf begins to explain how they were captured by goblins in the mountains. Beorn is immediately impressed that Gandalf killed a couple goblins right before they got captured, and this hooks him on the entire tale. So much so that he invites them inside, which is the next change. And again, this further reinforces what I was saying about book Beorn being so much more relaxed and hospitable than movie Beorn. As soon as Beorn hears about goblins, he invites Gandalf and Bilbo inside to tell him the full story, which is probably because he doesn't get many visitors anyway. And inviting two people inside seems pretty harmless. But that's the genius part of Gandalf's plan, which Bilbo realizes as they continue on. And that also brings us to the next change, which is that in the book, the dwarves do indeed come 2 by 2 and only every 5 minutes. In the extended scene of the movie, they have Gandalf do a signal instead of a timeline, which confuses the dwarves, causing them to come out way faster than every 5 minutes. And eventually, the last 5 or 6 just walk out all at once. It's a complete mess, and per usual in these films, it just turns the dwarves into comic relief. But in the book, this 2 by 2 strategy is very purposeful. As Gandalf goes through the story, he keeps mentioning things like several or troop. And each time he says one of these, Beorn asks what he means, because 2 isn't several, or 6 isn't a troop. And these were timed so that each time a new number was mentioned, 2 more dwarves would arrive. And while this might have normally annoyed Beorn, he was so captivated by the story that he would welcome the newcomers and then immediately turn back to Gandalf to have him go on. In typical Gandalf fashion, it really is a genius plan. Anyway, another small change here that I have to mention real quick is that Thorin actually comes first, not last. And I've gotta also say that Beorn would have never recognized Thorin by his face. Although the movies don't explicitly state this, the look Beorn gives is like he recognizes Thorin, which is insane. Movie adaptations tend to do this, but The Hobbit does this a lot with Thorin, and that is that they make all the characters in the universe somehow aware of what Thorin looks like, despite the fact that they didn't have photographs back then. How would Beorn have ever seen Thorin's face before? While Beorn could have heard of Thorin's name, he definitely would have never recognized him like he seems to do in the film. But anyway, that's just my little side tangent. To get back to the main changes, our next change is that Beorn happily offers them all dinner even after finding out about all of the extra dwarves. And he doesn't offer them dinner because he sees Thorin like the movie suggests, he offers them dinner as a payment for the tale that Gandalf shared. He is so impressed by their escape and all the goblins they killed that he invites them inside, telling them that it's the best story he's heard in a long while. And that brings us to the next change, which introduces us to even more animal helpers around the house. Again, I would have loved to see this in the movie, because in the book we read that dogs literally stood on hind legs and served them, horses rolled in stumps for extra seats, and sheep brought in plates and utensils and more. It's like The Hobbit became a Disney movie in a split second. It also just rounds out Beorn's character so much, and it makes you like him even more because he can communicate with these animals who obviously respect and adore him. It makes him feel a little bit more approachable and likable. Another thing that got cut and changed is their conversation during the meal. In the book, Beorn shares stories with them and they have a good time together. It's not a serious conversation like in the movie. They don't get down to business until the next day. For that night, they sleep peacefully in his house and they notice Beorn slip outside, and they don't see him again until tomorrow. Which brings us to our final few changes. The first of which is that when Bilbo awoke the next morning, he couldn't find Gandalf or Beorn anywhere. The dwarves had no idea where they were, but soon enough Gandalf arrived back and informed them that he was tracking bear prints, and he noticed that there was a large gathering of bears outside Beorn's house that past night. Then Beorn eventually returned, and we hear from him how he went outside to confirm Gandalf's story. He went to the mountains and captured a warg and a goblin, and they told him the full story, even saying that Gandalf slew the Goblin King, and now they were hunting Thorin's company. This is finally the first news of any hunting going on. Also, this is the first fierce side of Beorn that we see, as he shows them what he did to the goblin and warg, and we see a goblin head outside and a warg skin hanging there. Bilbo realizes in that moment that Beorn can be a great friend, but a fierce enemy. However, the important part out of all of this is the fact that learning Gandalf killed the Goblin King is what makes Beorn love them all even more, and he eagerly offers them help, which is the next change. In the movie, it's a tense moment in which we don't know if Beorn will assist them or not, but in the book, he is more than happy to give them any and all aid. He provides them with ponies, water skins, food, which includes his famous honey cakes, bows to hunt in Mirkwood, and more. He even goes as far as to say that if Thorin or his people are ever in the area again, they're welcome in his home. Now, our second to last change is a small one, and that is that Beorn is the one who gives them advice about Mirkwood, not Gandalf. In the movie, Gandalf tells them about the path and the water and and all that, but in the book, Beorn tells them those details because he's more familiar with the area. And finally, our last change this week is regarding when they actually get to Mirkwood in the movie. There is no symbol of Sauron's eye on a statue, Gandalf doesn't have a telepathic conversation with Galadriel, and obviously, like we said earlier, he doesn't leave them abruptly, but rather he had warned them days before that he wouldn't continue on with them into Mirkwood. And with that, we're finished up with all of our changes regarding the first 30 minutes of the second Hobbit movie. So now that you've heard it all, and you can see the exact changes between book Beorn and movie Beorn, which version do you prefer, the original or the Jackson special? Let me know in the comments, and let me know if you would have done anything differently. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and check out the series playlist to catch up on any episodes you might have missed so far. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.